Thank you very much, Sean, for that welcome. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming to listen to us speak today. We are delighted to be at the third South African drug policy meeting. It really is. I've got nerves, and I don't really have nerves, but I feel as if I'm speaking to my peers today.
Hello, everybody. It really is an honor and a privilege to be here today, and I would just like to thank Sean and his team and all of the funders for bringing cannabis to the fore in this Drug Policy Week. You know, in the past, we've been kind of sidelined to a little side event in the evening, and to be keynote speakers and everything is indeed a privilege. And I know that Sean was fighting for us in the corner to actually get the cannabis issue on the agenda for today. So now in 2010, Jules and I were arrested in our home. 2 o'clock in the morning, our gate was taken down. We were kept hostage in our house for over 5 hours, terrorized by the police. And if you want to know more about the story of how we started out and how we became the Dagga couple, we invite you to watch our TED Talk. We call our TED Talk our CV, and if anybody wants to know how we got where we are today, this was a great platform that we always send everybody to. Because today, we're not going to speak about how we got here and our history as the Dagga couple. We're going to speak about the future, starting with where we stand now in this room and carrying on to a vision that we have for cannabis for all South Africans. And that is why our nonprofit company is called Fields of Green for All. So when you write our email address, you have to write out fieldsofgreenforall.org.za, because we need to remind people all the time that this is for all South Africans. Not just groups here and groups there. Very, very important. When we first started out and we started our legal challenge, we sued 7 South African government departments on charges of enacting unlawful laws. Our first legal team advised us that we needed to build a large social activism campaign, and we needed to register a nonprofit company in order to get legitimacy for our campaign. So please, after this, go and watch our TED Talk. It's 18 minutes long. You'll get the background. But as we stand here today, our byline for these talks is you can't get what you want unless you know what you want. So we have devised our Desired Outcomes Tour because, say the government had to grant us a referendum on cannabis, and everybody voted to say yes. Then what? Would you have to buy your Dagga at a government shop? Would that suit us? We've taken this tour 2,000 kilometers from Richards Bay in the northern KwaZulu-Natal down to Cape Town. It is our Desired Outcomes Tour, and every time I say that about buying your Dagga at a government shop, because our audience has been growers, consumers, traders, everybody just says, no, 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 nobody wants to buy their Dagga at a government shop. So this whole issue of cannabis is not a yes-no question. Even the courts say yes, it's not a yes-no question. It's far more complicated than that.
So before we deal with the future, we'd just like to take you back about 18 months to how this Constitutional Court judgment actually came about. When Myrtle and I were arrested, we eventually released from jail, we wrote an affidavit to the Pretoria High Court claiming our human rights to ingest actually whatever we want, but we stuck to cannabis. And that affidavit sent a shockwave through the law because we set a precedent in law and the judge agreed with us, and we basically started compiling a trial, a human rights trial for the right to ingest cannabis. Concurrently, there were 2 gentlemen in Cape Town doing exactly the same thing. And as soon as we set the precedent with our papers, we actually gave those papers to those gentlemen to run with the same thing. So for the last 6 years, there has been a parallel course between Myrtle and I in the Pretoria High Court and Jeremy Acton and Gareth Prince in the Western Cape High Court. And those 2 gentlemen there are our personal heroes. The man on the left, Jeremy Acton, in the blue, He's the leader of the Dagga party, and he used our papers to get to the High Court in Cape Town with his co-applicant, Gareth Prince. And in March last year, Judge Dennis Davis agreed with them. It is our constitutional right to be able to do what we want in the privacy of our home pertaining to pertaining to Dagga. I nearly said weed then. So the state appealed it, and it was completely polarized right from the start. You either love the stuff or you hate the stuff, and the newspapers said just that. The debate completely polarized at that point as the state said there is no way Judge Dennis Davis is correct. So it went to an appeal. Meanwhile, 3 months later, Myrtle and I went into the Pretoria High Court by way of trial. Jeremy and Gareth went to the Western Cape High Court by means of application, which basically means they take reams and reams of paper and dump it on the judge's desk and say, read this, which they did. However, we decided to take it on as a trial because we realized that the 1992 Drugs and Drug Trafficking Act, this last bastion of apartheid, would never be broken down properly by an application. So we spent 3 years preparing a trial with these people here. And these are our superheroes. This is the team at Schindler's Attorneys that we've come to love as family. We've been with them for 4 years, and look how young they are. Look at these amazing legal minds that can see the future of South Africa. They're all in their 30s. And in front of them there is our definitive argument as to why we think cannabis should be legalized in South Africa. In a major coup in the Pretoria High Court, we managed to get the whole trial live streamed by the national broadcaster. In the top right-hand corner of that picture there, you can see Advocate Don Mahon, the man that is steering our ship, again in his mid-30s with a vision. And on the stand in that picture is Professor David Nutt, who is a man, a neuropsychopharmacologist from Trinity House in London, and he came to tell everybody about the relative harms of illicit drugs, which I'm sure you all know about the relative harms. So this was a very important piece of testimony, and it ended up with a headline like this, and that is why we brought him out. Because plain and simple, if you're going to make anything illegal or something not illegal, there has to be some sort of relativity to it. And he said under oath that if you're going to ban Dagga, you must ban alcohol, which is absolutely true. The appeal went ahead with the state in November last year. And for the first time ever, these 4 people stood on the steps together in unison. We were given leave we were co-applicants in the Constitutional Court hearing. And so that meant we could take David Nutt's evidence into the Constitutional Court for the bench of 10 to appraise and use as part of their decision making. And then we waited, and we waited. And months went by. 6 months went by. And we were wondering what to do about it. And we sent polite letters, and we had open letters in the national press. But in the meantime, our work carries on, because parallel to all of this court case business, we've actually been granted United Nations security clearance, and now we're at the World Health Organization and the Commission on Narcotic Drugs in Vienna, because we have this philosophy that now we've got this groundswell of South African support and sort of 60,000 people on a Facebook group, and we've got all of these court proceedings. Why not go to the top and start from the top down and try to tune these people to actually change the laws? Because our detractors in South Africa say, no, we're beholden to all of the international conventions. Well, what if there were no international conventions pertaining to cannabis? So there's a very proud young lady underneath the South African flag at Vienna for the last 2 years. And as civil society, we have been poking the beast. And civil society, as we all know in this room, has become more and more a voice of drug policy around the world. So we're very proud of our work at the very top of the tree as well. Finally, last month, the bench of 10, actually 9 on the day, came into the court, and we flew up from Port Elizabeth for the judgment. And as soon as Judge Zondo said, in a unanimous decision, Myrtle and I burst into tears. We couldn't hold it any longer because we knew as soon as he said in a unanimous decision, we had them. There's no way there could be a unanimous decision against us. And the press obviously had something to say. And the press obviously had something to say. We like that one the most because we truly believe in it. A lot of people think we're doing this to cause chaos and mayhem and just suit ourselves just so we can smoke weed in the privacy of our own home. We truly believe this picture here, that the legalization of cannabis will take South Africa forward into the 21st century. We absolutely categorically believe it. Unfortunately for us, it's these guys that make the laws. So for the next 2 years, we have to lobby these guys to make sure we actually get what we want out of Parliament. And it's a daunting prospect. Because we think there should be nothing about us and our cannabis plant without us. So we're going to listen in. We're going to go to the portfolio meetings. We're going to take some experts along. If anybody in this audience would like to join us, because we don't feel particularly qualified to go to Parliament, come and see us later, because we need your help. And the reason that we wrote the book that's in front of you on the table is to give the government the ideas that we have collected over the last 8 years around the world looking at cannabis policy. We can take this to the government and say, look, here are the options, now let's talk about it. This, by the way, I have nothing to do with. This young lady here, she did this over 3 years of Sundays while I went for a walk. This is her baby, not mine.
So if you see in your table of contents at the beginning of the book, we have got a lot to cover. Now, I've been gathering the information for this discussion document. You'll see on the cover at the bottom it says discussion document for quite a few years, and I ended up with tons and tons of information, and I didn't really know how to consolidate it all. So what I did is I actually pared down all of that information into a table of contents. And then with our road trip going all the way around South Africa, what I'm asking the South African cannabis community and our esteemed drug policy experts here today in the room is to go carefully through that table of contents and see whether we've missed anything out. Because this is just a discussion document, we really welcome your input. And if you go to the outcomes page on our Fields of Green for All website, you'll see that there's a comment section. And you can comment, and please just let us know if there's something that you disagree with or something that's inaccurate or something that we've left out. So we certainly can't go through this whole table of contents today. It's just too much. The table of contents in your book looks a little bit different to the one on the screen, because in the interim, since we printed the books, we've had our amazing graphic designer has actually made us some nice infographics and made it look a lot prettier than it is in the book. So this is basically the framework. We've divided it up into various sections according to the importance, because we have to cover absolutely everything in this. The idea is to expand this 40-page book into possibly a 600-page document. Take it to Parliament, put it down in front of them, and say, right, we've done your work for you. Let's use this, the voice of the South African cannabis community and civil society, as our starting point. Because quite frankly, those guys in Parliament don't know anything about cannabis. So we're going to do their work for them so that we can get a head start by the time this portfolio committee, which that's how we think it's going to happen, actually starts to sit down and do the work. Now, when we formed Fields of Green for All, what did we know about creating an NGO? We didn't know anything, so where do you start? Luckily, I had a friend who worked in the NGO sector in monitoring and evaluation for renewable energy, and she pointed me in the right direction. She says, this is where you start. Now, because we've been speaking to the cannabis community along the road, and a lot of people don't have any idea how to organize themselves, I always start with this slide, because it's good to go back to the drawing board and say, right, what are my inputs? What are my outputs? What are my activities? What is the impact that my work is going to be doing? With the privacy judgment in the Constitutional Court, there are lots of people trying to organize themselves So this is the guidelines that we give to everybody, and this is how we organized Fields of Green right in the beginning. And I always go back to this flow diagram to check whether we're on track. And we're very proud to say that we can tick all those boxes on that flow diagram. We've done everything over the last 8 years that we set out to do.
So let's have a little look about the current state of play with cannabis in not only South Africa, but pretty much Southern Africa. If you look on the right-hand side of that slide in the middle, it says 900,000 farmers, and that is the biggest takeaway of this whole slide. That is a figure that's been researched by the Daily Maverick newspaper and some investigative journalists. 900,000 cannabis farmers in South Africa alone. That's what Fields of Green for All is all about. The three main, we break it down into three main sections: the cultivation, the trade, and the use of cannabis. There are various ways of growing cannabis in South Africa. Indoors, under lights, what the popular press would love to call a Dagga lab. And if you put a light on a cannabis plant, it means you're doubly evil. And you're going to make super weed that you're going to sell to high school children. That's what they think about putting a light on a cannabis plant. But we would suggest to you, if you want to get into large-scale production of a medical product that needs standardization, you're going to have to grow it indoors with exactly the same conditions throughout. So there is a place for it, not only in the tabloids. In Johannesburg, we put greenhouses over cannabis because we are susceptible to hailstorms that completely trash our harvests. You can create your own climates within it. It keeps bugs and other hohos away from things, so the greenhouse method is becoming more and more popular throughout South Africa. And of course, the backbone of all South African cannabis trade is outdoor growing. And it responds exceedingly well to South African sunshine, as you all know. We are the third largest producer of cannabis in the entire world, and when we go overseas to meet our peers in other parts of the world, South African cannabis is revered. It is an absolutely golden green national asset. So when we took the trial of the plant to court, we had four main platforms that we were attacking. One of them is responsible adult use. That's us. We are very, very responsible adult users. We never say recreational use because it sets you up for an argument. Recreational implies that you're doing it for no purpose. You're just doing it to have fun in some sort of flippant way. But if you say if you say responsible adult use, nobody can say to you or us, what about the children? Because that's a mantra. What about the children? So if you say responsible adult use, it locks that argument completely down. It's an adult story, this. We don't even call it medicine. We call it a health product because, again, medicine kind of sets you up for failure. Because what if it isn't medicine for some people? And what if it fails as medicine for some conditions? So we call it a health product because we know, we've seen time and again over the last 40 years of adult use, that it helps people with their condition, even if it's a shift in perspective at the end of the day. The industrial uses of cannabis are known throughout the world, but it looks like weed, so we can't grow it because in case it is weed. So the industrial use of cannabis is right there, ready to step into the forefront and make South Africa absolutely amazing. And our silver bullet in South Africa, something that's so different to anywhere else in the world that is grappling with the legalization problem, is the traditional and cultural use. It's very difficult to define a cultural use. The traditional uses in South Africa go back 600-700 years. They do not have such a history in Europe or North America or Canada. There are also 350,000 traditional healers in South Africa, which sets us apart from anywhere else on the planet because they all want cannabis back in their pharmacopoeia. They all want to be able to prescribe it as medicine once again. So these are very, very important parts of the conversation that we have with the worldwide drug policy community. We think, this is a personal opinion, 20 million people use cannabis in South Africa. 1 in 3 people in South Africa either use it, condone the use of it, or have used it.
So that is basically a picture of what is popularly known as the black market. We prefer to call it the underground market. So now, you take that underground market, now how do you, back to organizing ourselves. How do we organize ourselves? Where do we even start with proposing some sort of legal regulation? And here, I don't see that he's here today. I'm forever indebted to Steve Rolls. And we've spoken about it a lot, and I always give him the credit for his inspirational work with Transform and their booklet called How to Regulate Cannabis. So this is straight out of there. So we need some principles to start, things that we can go back to during our work and say to question ourselves, say, are we sticking to our principles that we started out with? The first one is proportionality. It's really, really important, given our cornerstone evidence from Professor Nutt about the scale of harms, that the cannabis regulations are proportional to, for example, alcohol or, for example, tobacco. So proportionality is very important. Certainty. Right now, as we stand, there's nothing more uncertain than cannabis in South Africa. You should have a look at our inbox. How much can I grow? Can I take it on a plane? Can I have it in my car? Am I allowed to grow it in somebody else's garden? And so it goes on. We have no certainty. It is a mess out there. People are very, very confused following this judgment. When it comes to our regulations, we have to make sure that we have some certainty. And also a spirit of flexibility. Although these two terms seem to contradict each other, we need to go into our negotiations with the government with a spirit of flexibility in our hearts. We need these regulations to be durable. We can't have them changing and changing and changing all the time once they've been set down. We need foresight. We need transparency and accountability. Now, transparency and accountability is a bit of a rare thing in South Africa. You know, it's a bit of a big ask of our government right now. So let's aim to be completely accountable for what we do as civil society who operate with integrity. We need capable regulators, something that's also a little bit of a rare thing in South Africa. So this is why we're looking to self-regulation. And we want our regulator to be called the Cannabis Ombudsman, with the bud pit in capital letters. And we want to be able to appoint the Cannabis Ombudsman ourselves, so that that is the person who regulates us and not some politician who's never smoked a joint. We need a bit of foresight, which goes together with our durability, a bit of foresight, research. We need to get all the clever people in the room to make sure that we've got foresight and we ensure the durability of our regulations. It has to be relevant to social context. We are not Uruguay, we are not Canada, we are not Europe. The South African social context, our history of cannabis use, our current social strengths and weaknesses as we stand have to be taken into account. And these regulations hopefully will be relevant not only for South Africa, but also Southern Africa and the rest of the continent. We need to have a specific set of aims that are going to prop up these. So now Steve also put these in his talk on Tuesday, so I'm just going to run through them quickly. We need access to improved healthcare. Cannabis is a very, very effective treatment for many conditions. So this can really relieve some of the burden of our healthcare system. We need to reduce drug-related crime by making the underground, so-called black market, legitimate. Not throwing them all in the bin, but bringing them up from the underground and bringing them into the light. We need to protect the young and the vulnerable, and you know, people always like, what about the children, what about the children, what about the old people? Old people are abused every day in South Africa just as much as young people. So I have a particular thing for protecting old people, and we will always have vulnerable members of our society of all ages. So very important. And we need to protect our human rights because this, of course, is a human rights issue. We need to provide good value for money. And this doesn't mean we need to be able to buy cheap weed. This process of the regulation of cannabis in South Africa cannot be a burden on our taxpayers. We need a simple system that is easily understood by everybody, that is fast-tracked into implementation, and that's what we mean by value for money.
So I think, Steve, if you're here on the first day, Steve put this drug spectrum up, and we've taken it from Transform, and we show this to everybody who's never basically seen it before. And right now, with the Constitutional Court judgment, South African cannabis policy is sitting on the left-hand edge of that orange band. We have now got some sort of decriminalization, and that to us, as cannabis users, is the ultimate harm reduction. So if anybody yesterday doesn't know what harm reduction is because it's not in the NDMP, I'll tell you right now, our paranoia levels are almost zero now after 40 years of cannabis use. That is harm reduction. Stop arresting people, for Christ's sake. That is harm reduction. That's the elephant in the room. Now, in the very first slide, there was a picture of me outside the Pretoria High Court. It said yes, no, a referendum. Well, there's been yes, no's all over the world. This is just cannabis. This is not anything but cannabis. So if you want to take cannabis on holiday, don't go to the red places. Look at Australia. You can be a felon in both hemispheres, but in the middle, you're not. So everyone's grappling with this crazy situation of decriminalization, legalization, medical, responsible adult use. If you go to South America, I'm sure you'd be able to use cannabis comfortably because it's been deregulated. There are still penalties for it, but you're not going to go to jail and be put in a cage as a human being for your cannabis use. If you look on the western seaboard of America, in Alaska, Portland, California, 40 million people can now use cannabis as responsible adults. But in California, there's a 280-page book of rules and regulations where what you can't do with legalized cannabis. And we've talked about Uruguay during the course of the last couple of days. It's been mentioned as a drug policy hotspot. Well, there it stands alone on the right-hand side in the middle of South America. There are 2.5 million people in Uruguay. That's what made it easy for them to legalize it. However, you have to sign a drug register. You have to tell the government that you are a drug user to be able to use cannabis, and you have to buy the cannabis from them. There are 4 strains in Uruguay that are legal, and you have to buy them all from the government, and nobody does. And at the United Nations in March, we spoke to the Uruguayan delegation, and they admitted that 85% of cannabis sales in Uruguay are still in the underground market. Because make no mistake, if they don't give us what we want, we're going to take it anyway.
So, as we stand here, it's very easy in policy circles when you've got lots of ideas in your head and you end up having a meeting about a meeting, and you end up going round and round in circles. So what we hope to offer you today is some practical solutions. And all of our practical solutions on how to structure the regulations all come back to this. It's called the scale of harms, and as we can't repeat enough, it was drawn up by Professor David Nutt and his colleagues. And it's very, very important that we always bear this in mind in order to get that proportionality. So right at the top is alcohol, right at the bottom is psilocybin mushrooms. I'm sure that you are all very familiar with this type of scale of harms diagram. It was based on harms to others, overall harm, and harm to the users themselves. Now, I just want to reflect on tobacco for a little bit. I'm a terrible tobacco addict, and I use that because I always beat myself up about because I'm never giving up the ciggies. But in South Africa, when I started smoking cigarettes, there was no such thing as black market cigarettes. Cigarettes were cigarettes, and you chose your brand and you bought it. Now, how come my brother can go and buy a packet of cigarettes for 6 rand in Pretoria? And how come the over-harsh tobacco regulations almost brought down the South African Revenue Service? It really did. If you look into all of the details of the mess that SARS are in, illegal cigarettes are right in the middle. And why? Because I pay 45 rand a packet. That's why, because it's been over-regulated due to paranoia and not looking at it as a responsible adult product. So it's good to hold up tobacco as the flagship of how not to do things. Really, one can't have this overcomplicated over-regulations. The gangsters will step in, and they'll be too happy to smuggle cigarettes over the border from Zimbabwe and sell them to you for R6 a packet. So let's be very, very careful about over-regulating. So please bear this in mind while we look at the structure of what we propose.
If you go to page 6 of the document that you've got in front of you, there's a gray page, and we call them the non-negotiable outcomes. And with this page, we aim high as we possibly can. This is what we're going to go to the government with, and we are going to try and get 100% of what we are asking for with no compromise.
The arrest and detention of all cannabis users should stop. The police brutality towards all cannabis users should stop immediately. There is to be an 18-year age limit. Unless you have a sick minor, that sick minor must surely qualify for cannabis medication. A licensing system in South Africa is open to corruption. We believe there is no place in South Africa for a licensing system. The laws pertaining to the regulation of cannabis should be no more harsh than they are for tobacco or alcohol. All freed cannabis prisoners must not be excluded from a future South African cannabis industry. Drug testing in the workplace for cannabis has to stop immediately. Nobody should lose their job because they have cannabis in their system. Matrimonial disputes, child custody battles cannot be waged around cannabis any more than alcohol does. The underground market must be brought out of the shadows and the so-called dealers turned into shopkeepers. All cannabis criminal records are to be expunged, and all cannabis prisoners are to be set free immediately with no conditions.
This is what the future of cannabis in South Africa should look like. It all starts with the growers. The growers then need to organize themselves into what we like to call hubs in order that their produce can be distributed and sold on in the retail sector. So that is the big picture. Let's first look at the growers. The farmers, the producers, the people who get their hands dirty, put the seeds in the soil. They are the foundation of our South African cannabis industry. The industrial growers should be aligned to the Department of Agriculture because it's an agricultural product. And we are very pleased to announce that the Department of Agriculture is playing along very nicely. They sent representatives to our cannabis conference last year. We know that Tony Budden, our hemp expert, is in constant contact with the Department of Agriculture, so it is moving on. The commercial growers. Now, what we consider to be like the Antichrist are the big commercial growers from overseas. They're coming to steal our sun, and we'd better pay attention, or otherwise they will take our cannabis industry from out underneath our feet. But there is a place for the commercial growers. Right now, it is illegal to be a commercial grower. So this puts us, as the South African cannabis community, in the best position because we've got 2 years to organize ourselves so that we've got hundreds of thousands of small cannabis businesses that will keep the big commercial interests at bay. Then we have the cooperative growers. This is something that can happen now because we can work around this judgment with privacy and private land and private growing and private, okay? We can work around it and we can establish ourselves. So cooperative growing is very important. Then you can do in-house growing, where you have a seed to sale type thing, a seed to share, because we're not allowed to sell it yet. Seed to share system, where you grow it in the backyard and then you consume it in the front room. You have our traditional growers, we have our subsistence growers, and thank goodness. In our past presentations over the last few weeks, I've always been saying that I don't know what to do, what to propose for the traditional and the subsistence growers. And now the Constitutional Court did our work for us. So we have the right to grow and to use and to share this plant within a private setting so that can cover our traditional growers and our subsistence growers. So these people are very, very important to us. They are the people that put the seed in the ground. And as Julian was saying, we've got 900,000 cannabis farmers in South Africa. That is everybody from our rural communities who have been growing this plant for 700 years to some suburban bloke who's got a few lights in a cupboard and growing for his own use. Our growers, it includes absolutely everybody who's planting seeds in South Africa. Now what happens? You grow this plant and then? So what we propose is that we have hubs. Now I like the word hub, but you can call it a co-op too. Because if you are driving on the N2 from Johannesburg to Durban, and you're going through the flatlands of the Free State, what do you see on the side of the road? You see those big, tall silos. That's a mealie hub. We call it a mealie hub or a maize co-op. Now, what we want for cannabis is we want cannabis co-ops. They don't have to be huge, big, centralized industrial things. Co-ops can be small. They can be a co-op of 5 farmers. And this is how we start to get our growers to be empowering themselves. And a co-op is a community effort. It's not somebody coming in from the outside and saying, okay, I'm setting up a co-op and now you must follow my rules. It's a community effort, and I think that we can start setting up these co-ops and hubs now because we've got the law on our side with the privacy. And then these hubs have particular responsibilities. One could have quality control being done at the hub. We could have mobile quality control vans that come around during harvest season and go from hub to hub to hub, making sure that even the most remote grower has got access to quality control for his plant. That's very, very important. One can have a system of annual certification to make sure that all of your members are up to speed with what you do. One can process the byproducts because, as you know, you can use every single part of the cannabis plant from the tips of the roots to the top of the tree. So these byproducts could be a non-taxable resource for that hub and for the growers. One could tax the plant at source through these hubs so that we don't take our growers who need to concentrate on looking after the plants and throw them into a messy tax system that's difficult to understand. The hubs could do this tax system at source. The cannabis could be warehoused in the hub because say you have grown 10 fields of cannabis this year, you've got a really nice harvest, but you're not comfortable about keeping this valuable harvest at your home or on your farm. We could have secure warehousing facilities because storage and transport is very important. It might just seem like a little thing on the side, but it's very, very important. And then how would this cannabis be sold? We suggest an anonymous auction, like the Zimbabwe tobacco model, because that way we can combat price fixing. And we can keep a reasonable price structure for all across the board in Southern Africa. So those are the responsibilities of this hub. And then it's all very well that all of the cannabis is at the hub and all of the growers belong to the hub. What happens from there? It has to be distributed, and there will have to be very, very careful regulations around the distribution of the various cannabis products. And I suggest that all of these different sectors around distribution are regulated in their own particular way. How are hemp products distributed as opposed to food products and traditional products? There also needs to be regulation for in-house products. Even if that cannabis is never leaving the building when it's produced, there still needs to be regulation. So the distribution needs to be very carefully looked at. We'll have to bring in experts from other sectors to share their ideas with us so that we can formulate this and flesh it out a bit more. And then we have the retail sector, which as I stand here now, remains completely illegal. But I want to assure all South Africans that we will not stop until cannabis can be a viable contributor to the South African economy. We cannot possibly have it stuck in the private personal use phase of it. This is a phase, it's a very good foundation, it gives us time to mobilize, but we will fight, whether it's in court and in Parliament, to make sure that we can assure retail. But retail comes with a specific set of responsibilities. The retail sector would require business registration, not a license. Not a license. A license implies that there's somebody around there who's going to play God and decide that you can have a license, but you can't. That is the problem with licenses. They're going to be bought and sold and corrupted and undo all of the good work we've done. Business registration, yes, it's simple. Labeling, we've heard about advertising and packaging, and what do we do about traditional products? How do we enforce the age limit? So the retail thing carries a big responsibility. It's very, very important that this is structured for the people, for the economy, both the formal and the informal economy. We need to pay attention to what we're going to do about retail. Then, if you take Julian's diagram of the underground market and my diagram of the future market, you can see that they fit really nicely into each other. There is a place for every type of cannabis producer, whether they're indoor, outdoor, subsistence, rural, whatever type of cannabis farmer you are. There's a place for all different types of use. There is a place for all of the different types of medical use, for example, traditional healers as opposed to Western doctors. So the two models fit in really nicely to each other, and we will continue to stress the simplicity of it. Might seem like we're oversimplifying this, but this is how it should stand. We take the underground market, we take the future market, and we blend the two together so that there's upliftment for all South Africans.
It's true. That's what licenses does. And we watch it all the way around the world. Every single country that is grappling with the legalization of cannabis problem is dishing out licenses. But we watch carefully because this happens. Oh, sorry, your license has just tripled in price. Oh, I'm so sorry, you can't have one anymore. Oh, really? Well, you've got to do this, and you've got to put a 6-meter fence. Oh, did I not tell you about the electricity requirements? And so it goes on, and you get pounded into the ground. You spend so much money on it trying to stay afloat, you sink. We're vehemently against any licensing from any government of any cannabis plant in South Africa. There's another way of doing things that, to Myrtle and I personally, traveling the world, looking at all these legalization models. We went to Spain in 2015, and we were introduced to their social club model. Spain has got very, very powerful privacy rules. They've never really had cannabis prohibition through history. They've got a decriminalized state of cannabis. So when you walk into a cannabis social club in Barcelona, you have a credit card, a membership card, and you put money on that card at source. There's a little cashier, and you say, I want 30 euro on the card, please. Then the door closes behind you, and another door opens, and to us, it's like utopia. It's full of like-minded people using cannabis in a safe environment. And there are pool tables and Xboxes and coffee machines and a licensed bar and kids in the corner watching football, eating pizza. And there are 160 of them in Barcelona alone. And we believe with this Constitutional Court judgment now, this is the immediate future. Because we have very, very powerful laws of association in South Africa. 4 people make an association in the UK. And all over the UK, there are cannabis clubs starting just to get to the edge of the law, because we have to keep going to the edge of the law for everything to keep happening. We can't be complacent. So if you're thinking about starting a cannabis social club, it's easy. In Spain, 1 person can grow 5 plants. So by extension, 10 people can grow 50 plants and 100 people can grow 500 plants. And it's a maximum of 100 people in a cannabis social club in Barcelona. There is a little bit of a gray area. The government don't like these particular clubs really, because there's a lot of places within the system for the cannabis to actually leave the surrounds of the cannabis club and head off into the underground market. Because most of these clubs are in urban areas, they can't grow 500 plants there. Some do. Most of them grow in the mountains and it's transported in. And that, as Myrtle says, the transport thing, it's a critical part of this process. The governments don't like the transportation of cannabis yet. So this is a model we're going to chase. Last weekend at our property in Johannesburg, we formed a cannabis club for the first time ever just to see if we'd be arrested. And we weren't. We had 120 people come to our property, 10 people from around the country that have supported Fields of Green for All for the last 8 years, brought their finest products with them on their personal property, in their personal car. And they came to our personal place, and personally, we all tested their products and had what we call the Dab Olympics. It works, and we didn't get arrested, and we stand here today, and we're going to do it again one day because it's really exciting.
So it's all very well to have structures around cultivation, use, and trade, which are the main three areas, okay? But there's all sorts of other little niggly things around the periphery that one needs to pay attention to. And this being South Africa, we have to think about security. Now, we know that the SAPRA/MCC guidelines for getting a license that stand now in South Africa require you to have a 2-meter-high electric fence around your cannabis plants, which is a bit overkill in South Africa. But we cannot disregard the thing of security. People will come and steal your Dagga. Very, very important. What about quality control? I mentioned this before. Quality control will fit into the section for the hubs. It's very, very important that there needs to be quality control even for the most, how can I call it, the most simple form of cannabis in South Africa, that which grows wild, can still be tested for quality. But having said that, South Africans must have the right. If you want to go and smoke stuff that's bought in a matchbox at the BP garage, you should have the right to. But we think that if we have quality control and labeling, that the South African cannabis consuming public will move towards only buying that which is quality controlled. So that's why the quality control has to be accessible for everybody, even the most remote farmers. Training and education. Now, this isn't only about cannabis. It's training and education for the whole, everything surrounding cannabis. And what we would like to see is to have a CETA, which is our, for the people who are not South African, a CETA accredited course where you can go, it's a national accreditation service. We can go and do a course, and if you get a certificate and it's CETA accredited, it carries some weight. So we would like to have CETA accredited courses in cannabis cultivation, production, and all of the various surrounding industries. So if you are in training and education and you want to make some money, start writing those courses. Yeah, it's going to be a big thing in the future. What about the environment? As we stand here in Cape Town with your dire water crisis that has hopefully eased off a little bit, we know that cannabis can contribute to ruining the environment. We know that. People use chemical fertilizers. The electricity that indoor growers use is sapping the national grid. We don't have enough electricity. So we would like to, right from the outset, emphasize the environment. Wouldn't it be awesome if every single indoor cannabis grower in South Africa was mandated to use renewable energy? It's a bit idealistic as I stand here, but it certainly is something to strive for. If all South African cannabis could be grown organically, that's even better. So we mustn't forget about our environment. Cannabis does use a lot of water, so we need to be clever about this. And then there's this thing with cannabis caregivers. Sharing is caring. This cooperative system can be expanded not only into the medical field, where one person can grow for a whole lot of patients, but it can be expanded into all sectors of the cannabis economy, where there's caring, sharing, collective efforts, collective growing, very important. Scientific research initiatives. We know that the South African universities, and I'm sure most of the universities across Africa, are really struggling for money. They're getting pressure from government to give free education. And I think by initiating scientific research, the South African universities can put themselves on the map when it comes to cannabis research. We know that we've got enough plant matter to go and put in their labs so that they can test it and publish it in these journals. So let's encourage our universities, our technicons, our institutes of technology to really be on the forefront of researching South African cannabis and Southern African cannabis and the conditions in which it's used and grown. Workers' rights within the cannabis community. You know, we always say we don't want jobs. We want empowerment and entrepreneurship. But there will always be those people who are salaried workers. We need to pay attention and we need to set the bar high. There should be no such thing as minimum wage for somebody who's working on a cannabis farm. We should start out by saying it has to be minimum wage times 5, because there's going to be a lot of money to be made in the cannabis industry. And if we allow these overseas companies to come and employ our people at minimum wage, that is just not good enough. So workers' rights within the cannabis industry are very important. Dagga tourism. We love this one. And imagine the Eastern Cape, Pondoland, the former Transkei, is the world hub for Dagga tourism. You have the youngsters from Stuttgart landing here, and they get put in a combi with spliffs of South Africa's finest, and they get toured around all the fields and everything. We know that tourism is a great drive for good in many areas of our country, so let's incorporate cannabis tourism into that.
5 minutes.
And then we must not forget about our neighbors. We don't want to be accused of cross-border trafficking and South Africa just taking liberties with the cannabis laws. We don't want to create conflict with our neighbors. So let's include our neighbors and our friends from the rest of Africa in our discussions right from the beginning, and that is why it's a privilege to be here with the rest of our African cannabis community. Let's consider our neighbors.
There has to be some form of regulation, because at the moment we've got a free-for-all, and that's why we're doing this. It's all in the hands of the wrong people. So there has to be some sort of societal norms. Where are we going to smoke the stuff? Maybe we should smoke it in exactly the same place as you're allowed to use if you're a tobacco addict. You have your own drug consumption rooms. I want my drug consumption room. This is a drug consumption room that was regulated one day at the 420 party in Vancouver this year. 42,000 people lit up all at the same time. But it was regulated. You can't do that every day of the week there, but there was a regulation that you could. What about the age restrictions? In Canada now, there are 9 provinces just about to go live next Monday. Some are doing 21, some are doing 19, one is doing 19 and the rest are 18. But I would suggest to you, if there's a 21-year age limit, you're just going to criminalize people for 3 more years. So if it's good enough for alcohol and tobacco, it's good enough for cannabis. This is going to be a big one as well, driving. Now, I don't know about, has anybody got THC in their bloodstream here? Yeah? So how did you get here?
Drove.
We drove. And we've been driving like this for 40 years, but people think as soon as it's legalized, it's going to be chaos because we've never practiced driving under the influence. This is a big fight that we're going to fight. The transportation. Right now, I can get in my hire car and buy 73 bottles of Johnny Walker and drive it to Limpopo. I want exactly the same right for cannabis. I want to be able to put 2 tons of weed in the back of a 6-ton and drive it wherever I want in the country. That's legal. The storage is going to be we know storage is going to be a problem, and Myrtle touched on it in the distribution and the hub slides. And let's get it straight. We said in the non-negotiables that nobody should lose their job for having THC in their system. However, there are some industries that just have a zero policy. And you will have to live with that zero policy. If you want to go and work in a gold mine, there is a zero policy for narcotics in your blood. You're going to have to live with that. And then looking to the future,
we have to engage with government. That's what's really going to be a challenge. And I just implore everybody here, if you've got any ideas or anybody that can help us to engage with government, we actually have no idea where to start. So that's a short one. Self-regulation. Between Jules and I, we really are against this creating of enormous national organizations. I think as we stand now, our road to self-regulation starts with small groups. Wherever you are in the country, wherever you are on the continent, small groups working with integrity, very important. The big associations will come. If the big associations are doing their job properly, the small groups will gravitate towards them and they will be successful. So self-regulation, very important. The use of technology. If you go to Ponderland and you park here and you have to walk 3 hours to a village, when you get there, there will be a smartphone. I guarantee you. This is the 21st century. Let's use technology to help us along the road. Let's create apps. All these techie guys, these very clever IT guys, they all smoke weed. So let's use them to use technology. Rewriting drug education, another huge task. We cannot have these people like Steve, the ex-addict, who I'm sure you all know, going around to schools and telling our young people rubbish about substances, not only cannabis. We need to rewrite drug education, particularly in the schools. So let's start with cannabis, and hopefully everything else will follow. We need to pay attention to what's happening internationally. And our dream in the next few years is to actually get a group of young, dynamic people from diverse backgrounds in South Africa and introduce them to the work that we've been doing in the United Nations so that they can take over from us as soon as possible. It's really, really important. We do not need to keep going to Vienna. We need the young people to be doing that. So that we're going to need some assistance with that for all the other drug policy people to please help us so that cannabis in Southern Africa can always be represented internationally. And then one of my personal favorites is the support industries. It's not all about the cannabis. It's also about everybody else, the green accountants, the green this, that, and the other. As they say, there's an urban legend which says in Kimberley, when they discovered the diamonds, it wasn't the people who found the diamonds that made the money, it was the person who sold the bucket and spade. So the cannabis industry is going to reverberate into all different sectors in South Africa.
So how can you help us? Well, you can join the conversation because we've spent a heck of a long time putting together lots of social media portals. We are being shadow banned by social media because we are cannabis activists, so it's very difficult to find the Dagga couple on Facebook anymore. We are there is nearly 60,000 people, but if you've never been to the Dagga couple Facebook page and you go to your phone now to look for us, we're not there. So there's a lot of banning going on, but we live with it. We have some very, very dynamic websites full of information and full of this document. If you want to send this PDF to all of your colleagues around the world, they're on our websites. We have a portal in the back of Fields of Green called the Green Network, and for the price of 1 gram of weed per month, you get the inside track, and you get tickets to all our events, and you get a free T-shirt, and you get to know what we're doing before anybody else gets to know. And this is the backbone of our funding, because remember, we are funded purely by the cannabis community. We have a Dagga arrest helpline, and Charles here in the front, he mans that line all the time. Maybe you saw him run out 2 or 3 times in the last couple of days. That's a live bust. They happen all the time. They've gone down since the judgment. It's gone a little bit quiet, but it hasn't gone away. We shake the tin everywhere we go because we're civil society. We're all broke. We know that. And the cannabis community are the people that help us along the way. There is a petition that's been out for 5 years. We're nearly on 30,000 signatures, but we want 100,000 signatures. So go online and please find our petition and please sign it. That is Armory for when we get to the government. And we're not alone. Look at all these associations that are part of this huge drive to get rid of the 1992 Act pertaining to cannabis. The religious groups, the Rastafari United Front, the Umzimvubu Farmer Support Network, who are here in the room, traditional healers, national healers, the Bush doctors, the CDCSA at the bottom there. They are grappling with a national cannabis cooperative movement to protect the rights of us all as we deal with the future. And come out about your cannabis use. Be proud of your cannabis use. You've got nothing to hide anymore. You don't have to be persecuted anymore. Be proudly green. And at the end of every presentation we ever do for the last 8 years, we put this, because this is why we did it. It's got nothing to do with cannabis in the end, the pros and cons of what it does and what it doesn't do. It is my right, and it's Myrtle's right, to put whatever we want into our bloodstreams, and it's nothing to do with you, and it's nothing to do with the government. And we stick with that right to the very end. My name's Julian Stobbs.
My name's Myrtle Clarke.
And we're the Dagga couple.
Thank you.